They called me too dumb for college. Now they work for me. When I think back to senior year, it still amazes me how one sentence could echo for years inside my head. You're just not college material. My guidance counselor said it softly, like she was breaking bad news about the weather, but it felt like someone had branded the words onto my forehead. Around here, college wasn't just a goal, it was a badge of worth. If you didn't get in somewhere fancy, you were the cautionary tale whispered about at reunions. I wasn't a bad student. I just learned differently. Numbers stuck better when I moved around, and essays made sense once I could talk them out loud. But teachers didn't have time for that. They liked the quiet ones who filled bubbles neatly. I was the kid who doodled flowcharts and margins and forgot the right formula halfway through. Mom worked 2 jobs, Dad had left early, and money was tight. The idea of expensive tutoring was laughable. I tried to teach myself algebra from YouTube videos after work shifts at the grocery store, half asleep with the screen glow reflecting off empty coffee cups. My grades climbed a little, but not enough to silence the whispers. By spring, everyone had their acceptance letters. Photos of smiling faces clutching envelopes plastered the hallway. I avoided eye contact, pretending to scroll my phone. When someone asked where I was headed, I said, still deciding. Truth. Every college I applied to had sent some version of the same polite rejection. One afternoon, while restocking shelves, I overheard my classmates near the checkout lane. Did you hear about Jake? Not going anywhere. Probably working here forever. Laughter. Not cruel. Exactly. Just confident in their hierarchy. The sound followed me like static. That night, I stared at the rejection emails again, noticing the phrasing. While your application shows promise, promise. Not enough. For a while, I believed them. I started counting failures like debts. Couldn't afford tuition, couldn't pass standardized tests, couldn't fit into the mold. But something inside refused to stay quiet. Maybe it was stubbornness, or maybe the humiliation was fuel. I began looking at the people who ran the store. Real adults managing budgets, logistics, staff schedules. They weren't geniuses. They were problem solvers. That clicked. So after graduation, instead of drowning in self-pity, I asked my manager for more responsibility. He laughed. You sure you want extra headaches? I nodded. Within months, I was closing up, counting registers, and learning vendor systems no one else cared about. While friends posted dorm selfies, I was learning inventory algorithms. It felt lonely at first. Friday nights spent balancing receipts instead of tailgating, but numbers finally started making sense when they connected to something real. Mom didn't always understand. Honey, you could try community college again next year, she'd say. But the idea of more tests made my stomach twist. Instead, I spent evenings reading business blogs and free online courses. Supply chain management sounded fancy, but boiled down to what I did daily, getting stuff from point A to B efficiently. One slow Tuesday, a supplier's truck broke down. Deliveries for 3 stores hung in limbo. I stayed late, calling around, rerouting shipments, even borrowing a friend's pickup. We pulled off by dawn. The regional manager noticed. A week later, he visited and asked how I'd managed it. I showed him the spreadsheet I built overnight, color-coded, time-stamped, ridiculously detailed. He squinted, then said, "You built this yourself?" That small question changed everything. He recommended me for a training program the company offered to internal employees. It wasn't glamorous, mostly webinars and local seminars, but it introduced me to the world of operations. Suddenly, the same brain that teachers dismissed as disorganized was thriving in chaos others avoided. The paychecks grew modestly, but pride returned in chunks. I stopped caring about classmates' curated college lives. They came home for breaks complaining about professors. I was coordinating store layouts. I learned to read profit and loss sheets the way others read novels. Patterns told stories if you paid attention. 2 years passed fast. One night, while closing up, I ran into Mr. Lewis, the old guidance counselor, shopping for detergent. He didn't recognize me at first. "Jake? Wow, I thought you went to trade school or something." I smiled. "No, I stayed here. Got promoted twice." He nodded politely, the kind reserved for pleasant surprises, then added, "Good for you. Maybe later you can take a few college courses." The tone still carried the old assumption that success needed a degree stamp. That night, I couldn't sleep. I realized I didn't want validation from the same system that almost broke me. I wanted ownership, real ownership, not just of a store, but of my choices, my time. So I started sketching ideas. At first, it was a notebook scribble, local logistics app, connects small retailers with freelance drivers. I had seen firsthand how deliveries failed for small shops that couldn't afford big contracts. What if someone built a network like rideshare, but for goods? The concept obsessed me. I read case studies on my phone during lunch, learned basic coding from free tutorials, and saved every spare dollar. It took a year to save enough for a used laptop and another to teach myself just enough code to build a prototype that barely worked. But the first time a local bakery used my app to get emergency flour within an hour, I felt something spark, proof that maybe I wasn't too dumb for anything. By the third year, I had 3 regular clients, then 10. The grocery chain noticed again, not to promote me this time, but to use my service. That was poetic. I left the job politely, thanking them for everything. My manager shook his head, half proud, half bewildered. Kid, you're doing what the college grads and corporates still can't figure out. The early months of business were brutal. Late invoices, broken code, nights questioning everything. But each setback felt different now. It wasn't a verdict, just data. I learned, adjusted, persisted. And slowly, people started calling me not dumb, but driven. One afternoon, while meeting a potential client, I walked into a conference room and froze. Across the table sat 3 familiar faces, my high school classmates, now junior managers at the regional branch of the very chain I'd left. The recognition flickered between us like a glitch. I smiled, extended a hand, and introduced my company. They tried to hide surprise, but I could see it, tiny cracks of disbelief. When the meeting ended, one of them caught me in the hallway. "Jake, this is your startup?" I nodded. He looked down, half laughing. "Man, I remember we gave you such a hard time. Guess joke's on us." I just shrugged. "Guess so." Inside, though, something uncoiled, a quiet satisfaction deeper than any speech. Not revenge, just balance restored. That night, I drove home past the same school where it all started. The windows glowed, and I imagined new kids inside being told what they couldn't do. I wanted to tell them that intelligence isn't a uniform. It's curiosity that refuses to quit. The months that followed were a blur of exhaustion and adrenaline. Growth came fast, faster than I was ready for. I had started with just myself, a beat-up laptop, and a few local retailers. But word spread through small business groups on Facebook. Try Jake's network. He actually answers calls. That line alone brought me more clients than any ad could. I hired my first part-time driver, a guy named Malik, who'd been laid off from courier service. He became my right hand before I even realized I needed one. We worked out of my mom's old garage, surrounded by boxes, extension cords, and a whiteboard with routes scribbled to marker. Mom would peek in sometimes with sandwiches and that half-worried, half-proud look. "You sure this is going somewhere?" she'd ask. "Yeah," I'd say, "just not sure where yet." She'd laugh softly, "as long as it's forward." By year 4, I registered the business properly. It felt surreal holding the certificate with my name printed under founder. I remembered that high school hallway, the laughter, the rejections, and wondered how many of those people had ever felt this particular mix of terror and pride. The first big test came when a local supermarket chain supplier canceled a week before Easter. Their regional manager called, desperate. I shouldn't have said yes. It was way beyond our capacity, but something in me refused to turn it down. We rallied every driver we had, even rented vans overnight. For 3 sleepless days, we ran deliveries nonstop, fueled by cheap coffee and pure panic. But we made it. Every order on time. That job changed everything. Suddenly, small businesses saw us as reliable under pressure. Bigger contracts followed. I learned to negotiate, to say no, to trust spreadsheets and instincts equally. For the first time, I wasn't just working hard, I was working smart. Still, success didn't erase insecurity. There were moments I felt like an imposter, especially when I sat in meetings surrounded by executives with framed degrees. I'd listen to their jargon, KPIs, vertical integration, scalability, and wonder if I was faking competence. But then they'd look at me when real problems arose. Trucks delayed, data errors, logistics breakdowns. And I'd fix them. Fast. That's when I realized something liberating. Degrees don't guarantee problem solvers. Around that time, I reconnected with one of my old classmates, Ava. Back in school, she was one of the few who never laughed at me. She had gone to college out of state and was working in marketing now. We bumped into each other at a cafe downtown. Jake, wow, I heard you started something, she said, smiling with genuine warmth. We talked for hours, catching up on lost years. She listened as I explained the business and offered sharp insights about branding and customer perception. You've built something real, she said, but your story is even bigger than your service. People will root for you if you tell it right. That conversation stuck. She wasn't wrong. Stories built trust. So I started sharing bits of my journey online. Short posts about failure, persistence, and small wins. The response shocked me. Messages poured in from strangers, students struggling with grades, workers who've been written off, parents telling their kids about the delivery guy who made it. For the first time, my story helped others believe in their own. Ava started consulting part-time for me. Her social campaigns turned our scrappy company into something that looked professional. We need a name that reflects motion and reliability, she said. After weeks of brainstorming, we landed on SwiftPath Logistics. Simple, memorable, forward. Within a year, SwiftPath had a small office, 5 employees, and a modest but steady profit. The first day, I paid salaries felt surreal, signing checks for others after years of counting coins for lunch. Malik joked, "Boss, remember when your office was your mom's lawn chair?" We laughed, but there was pride in his voice. Things changed when a local business magazine ran an article titled "From Stock Boy to Startup Founder." It spread faster than I expected. Suddenly, investors called. Most conversations ended with me politely declining. I didn't want to give away control too soon. But one email stood out from a logistics firm in the city offering partnership, not takeover. Their rep wanted a meeting. When I arrived at their headquarters, the lobby looked like a different world. Glass walls, marble floors, the faint scent of expensive coffee. I waited, palms sweating. Then the door opened, and I froze. The man leading the meeting was none other than Kyle, the same guy who'd laughed about me in high school. He didn't recognize me at first, buried in his tablet. "Jake Miller, SwiftPath, right?" he said, shaking my hand. "Glad you could make it." His expression changed halfway through the handshake. "Wait, Jake? From Eastview High." I nodded, smiling lightly. "That's me." A flicker of awkward silence followed. "Wow," he muttered, forcing a laugh. "Didn't expect this." I said nothing. I didn't need to. The meeting was all business. Kyle presented partnership terms, and I countered with data. Every time I explained a logistics model, his eyebrows rose a little higher. At one point, he said, "Man, you really know your stuff. You could have run circles around us in college." I smiled. Maybe, but I had to learn differently. When the deal went through weeks later, I felt a calm satisfaction. Not gloating, just closure. Life had made its own symmetry. That summer, SwiftPath hit its biggest milestone, our first million in revenue. I celebrated quietly with the team over pizza and sparkling cider. Malik raised a slice and said, "To the kid they said was too dumb for college." Everyone laughed, and I joined in, though inside I felt something deeper. It wasn't just about proving anyone wrong. It was about rewriting what smart meant. But success also brought new challenges: taxes, compliance, burnout. I learned leadership wasn't about working nonstop. It was about delegation and trust. I hired specialists who knew what I didn't. Every time I interviewed someone with a master's degree, I smiled privately at the irony. Education mattered, sure, but curiosity mattered more. One day, while reviewing applications, a familiar name caught my eye. I blinked. Reread it. Samantha Cole, my high school math teacher. The one who'd told me numbers just weren't my strength. She'd applied for an operations role. I stared at her resume, conflicted. Part of me wanted to laugh. Another part felt sympathy. Life had changed for both of us. During the interview, She looked nervous, not recognizing me right away. "I appreciate you seeing me," she said. "It's been hard finding stable work since the school downsized." I nodded, keeping my voice steady. "Of course, everyone deserves a chance." Halfway through, she finally noticed my name tag. Her face paled slightly. "Jake Miller." "Yes, ma'am," I said, smiling gently. "It's been a while." She stammered an apology for not remembering sooner, then whispered, "You've done incredibly well." I could see the discomfort, maybe regret. I didn't rub it in. I just said, "I had good teachers, even the ones who underestimated me." She smiled faintly, eyes damp. After she left, I sat quietly. Hiring her felt complicated, but also symbolic. I ended up offering her the position, not as revenge, but as release. We both deserve peace with the past. By year 7, SwiftPath had grown into a mid-sized firm with 20 employees, multiple vans, and a headquarters downtown. We weren't giants, but we were respected. Reporters called our story the comeback blueprint. They didn't see the nights I cried over unpaid invoices or the mornings I doubted everything. They only saw the glow. Sometimes I'd sit by the window of that office, looking at the skyline, thinking about that kid who once stocked shelves and believed he wasn't enough. I wanted to tell him that failure isn't final, it's fuel. The funny thing about success is how quietly it sneaks up on you. One morning you're counting coins for gas, and a few years later, people start calling you sir. It never felt natural to me. Even with a proper office, a staff, and a company car, I still carried that part of me that used to wipe down grocery shelves and pray no one noticed the sweat on my shirt. By the time SwiftPath hit year 8, things were stable, but I wasn't. My days blurred into endless emails, contracts, client calls, and late-night decisions. Growth was intoxicating, but it also demanded sacrifice. Relationships, sleep, and weekends all went missing. There were nights when I'd stare at the ceiling and wonder what the point of it all was if I barely had time to live. Ava noticed first. "Jake, you've been running on fumes for months," she said one evening after everyone had gone home. She'd stayed late to finish a campaign draft and found me still at my desk surrounded by cold coffee and invoices. "You need a break before you break." "I can't," I said. "If I slow down now, everything collapses." She leaned on the doorway, arms crossed. "You built a system, not a miracle. Let the system work." It stuck with me, but it was hard to follow. Control had become my comfort. Letting go felt like losing grip of my identity. For years, I'd fought to prove my worth. Rest felt like regression. The burnout caught up eventually. I woke one morning unable to move my neck from stress knots. Doctor's orders, 2 weeks off. No laptop, no emails. Just rest. I spent the first few days pacing, anxious. Then, without the noise of work, memories started surfacing of how this journey began and who I used to be. I went for drives without a destination, sometimes ending up outside the old high school. It hadn't changed much, same faded bricks, same football field. But I had changed. One afternoon, while parked near the bleachers, I saw a group of students practicing speeches. They reminded me of myself, awkward, uncertain, trying to sound confident. It hit me that maybe I could offer what I'd never had, a voice telling them they were capable even if they didn't fit the mold. The next week, after my break, I called the school principal. "Would you be open to a small mentorship talk for students who aren't college-bound?" I asked. She agreed immediately. "We've been trying to find speakers who didn't take the traditional route," she said. "They'll love hearing from you." The day of the talk, I stood in front of 20 students in the same auditorium where I'd once sat in the back row, doodling instead of listening. My palms were sweating, but not from fear, from meaning. "I used to sit where you're sitting," I began. And I remember thinking I wasn't smart enough for anything big. Turns out, I was just wired differently. I told them about the rejections, the long nights, the mistakes, the garage startup. Their eyes widened when I mentioned hiring my old teachers and classmates. But I emphasized the real point. Smart isn't about grades, it's about grit. Don't confuse difficulty with failure. Afterward, a shy girl approached me. "Mr. Miller," she said softly, "I get told I'm not cut out for college either. But I love fixing things, electronics, engines. Is that enough?" I smiled. "It's more than enough." The world runs on people who fix what others break. She grinned like someone had finally given her permission to dream. That day changed me more than any deal or milestone. It reminded me why I'd started. Meanwhile, SwiftPath continued to grow. Malik managed operations now. Ava handled marketing full-time. I focused on strategy, which meant spending more time with clients. That's how I ended up face-to-face with yet another ghost from my past. Ryan, the ex-valedictorian who once led our study group and never missed a chance to remind me of my average brain. He worked for a logistics consultancy now, representing a potential client for partnership. When he walked into my office, his expression was a mixture of confusion and disbelief. "Jake Miller? Wait, you own SwiftPath?" "Guilty," I said with a grin. He gave a low whistle. "Man, I'll be honest, I didn't see this coming." "Neither did I replied. "We talked numbers, routes, and metrics." His tone softened with each slide I presented. By the end, he said quietly, "You've built something incredible. I guess not everyone needs a degree to prove they're smart." I didn't gloat, didn't remind him of what he'd said years ago. The silence between us carried enough irony for both. When the deal closed, he offered a handshake that lingered longer than necessary, respect replacing old judgment. The partnership brought new revenue and credibility. SwiftPath was now servicing multiple cities, with plans to expand regionally. But with growth came investors again, this time more serious ones. One offered a buyout large enough to retire early. I spent nights staring at the numbers, the tempting zeros. Ava thought I should consider it. "You could start something new, Jake. You've already proved your point." But that's the thing. I wasn't doing this to prove a point anymore. I wanted impact, not trophies. I told her, if I sell, it becomes someone else's vision. I'm not done shaping mine. She smiled knowingly. "That's why people follow you." It was around then that Mom fell ill. Years of double shifts had taken their toll. Hospital visits replaced board meetings. I'd sit by her bed, laptop open, whispering updates between beeps of medical machines. She'd smile weakly and say, "You made it, baby. You really made it." One night she asked, "Do you ever think about going back to school? Just to finish what they said you couldn't?" I thought for a moment. "I think I already did, just not their kind of school." She laughed softly. "Yeah, life gives tougher exams anyway." When she passed a few months later, the grief hit harder than I expected. I buried myself in work again, but this time, the drive came from gratitude. I want to make SwiftPath something she'd always be proud of. We launched a scholarship fund in her name for students who didn't meet traditional academic standards but showed initiative in practical fields. Watching the first recipients tear up as they received grants was the most fulfilling moment of my life. One kid told me, "This is the first time someone believed I could do more." I smiled through tears. That's exactly what it's for. The fund gained local attention. Newspapers wrote about the CEO without a degree funding future innovators. It felt strange, but also poetic. Maybe this was the real full circle, not making doubters eat their words, but creating something bigger than ego. Years later, when I looked back, I realized that every insult, every rejection, every sleepless night had carved the person I became. If I'd been accepted into college, I might have followed someone else's path, learned someone else's version of success. Instead, I built my own. And whenever someone on the team struggled, I'd tell them what I wish someone had told me. "You're not dumb. You're just learning the hard way." And that's where the best lessons hide. The day of the scholarship ceremony, I arrived early, standing near the banner that read, "The Miller Foundation for Non-Traditional Learners." The room smelled faintly of new paint and coffee, filled with nervous students clutching envelopes. I saw myself in them. The same mix of fear and hope, the same quiet suspicion that maybe they didn't belong. A teacher stepped up to me. "Jake, you have no idea what this means for these kids." Half of them were ready to quit. I smiled, trying not to show how emotional I felt. "I know that feeling," I said softly. When I gave the keynote, I ditched the usual motivational cliches. "People once told me I wasn't cut out for higher education," I said. They were right. I wasn't cut out for their version of it. But I built my own classroom, one made of failure, persistence, and Google searches at 2 a.m. If you're sitting here thinking you're not enough, remember this. You're not behind. You're just taking the scenic route." The crowd laughed. Some teared up. After the ceremony, a boy with trembling hands came up and said, "Sir, when you said you built your own classroom, it felt like you were talking to me." He showed me a picture of his father's old mechanic shop. I learned better fixing engines than reading textbooks. I placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then you're already smarter than most. Keep building." Driving home that night, I couldn't stop thinking about my younger self, how much he needed someone to say those words. Life had come full circle again, but now it wasn't about closure. It was about legacy. Business didn't slow down either. Our tech team was improving the SwiftPath app, turning it from a simple logistics tool into a predictive network that could forecast delivery times based on weather, traffic, and historical data. The nerd in me loved every update. I'd always been called slow in math class, but now I was working with algorithms more complex than anything my teachers had ever mentioned. At a trade expo in Chicago, SwiftPath won an innovation award for mid-sized logistics startups. I went up on stage under bright lights, cameras flashing. When I thanked my team, I noticed a familiar face in the audience, a gray-haired man in a Navy suit. Mr. Lewis, my old guidance counselor. After the ceremony, he approached, looking both proud and uneasy. "Jake," he said, shaking my hand, "I followed your journey. I owe you an apology. Back then, I thought I was protecting you from disappointment." "I know," I replied, "but maybe disappointment's what built me." He nodded slowly. "Seems like it did." We talked for a while about the education system, how many kids fall through cracks not because they lack ability, but because the system lacks imagination. He sighed. "If I could do it over, I'd tell students like you that intelligence isn't a number." "Then tell them now," I said. "You can still change someone's story." He smiled sadly. "Maybe that's what this meeting was for, to remind me I can." When we parted, I felt lighter. It wasn't about forgiveness. It was about perspective. Sometimes people limit you not out of cruelty, but out of their own limited vision. Months later, SwiftPath's expansion took us to new heights. We opened hubs in 3 additional cities and partnered with regional manufacturers. For the first time, I hired executives with resumes longer than my entire life story. Some looked skeptical during interviews, probably wondering how a college dropout ran a company this size. But after a week, they understood. Results don't lie. I was in one of those meetings when Malik burst in with a grin. "Boss, guess who just applied for a marketing position?" I looked up from the reports. "Who?" He turned the laptop toward me. On the screen was the name Kyle Adams, my old classmate, the same one who'd once doubted me, then later negotiated that first partnership deal. "He left his firm last month," Malik said. "Wants to join us." For a moment, I didn't know how to feel. Pride? Irony? Vindication? Maybe all of them. We interviewed him the next week. He walked in wearing the same polite grin I remembered. "Jake," he said, extending his hand. "Looks like the tables turned again." I laughed. Maybe they just finally stopped spinning. He admitted he admired what SwiftPath had become. "You built something real," he said, "and I'd rather work with people who actually get things done than those who just talk about doing them." I hired him, not because of nostalgia, but because he was qualified. It felt symbolic, though. The kid who once joked about me stacking shelves now answered emails with my company signature. Not as revenge, more like proof that life rearranges hierarchies when you focus on growth instead of grudges. Over the next year, Kyle proved invaluable. He streamlined campaigns, secured clients, and never once treated me with condescension. Sometimes, during late-night brainstorming, we'd joke about high school. "You remember when I told you you'd never make it without college?" he said once. "Yeah," I said. He laughed softly. "Glad to be wrong." I smiled. "Glad you grew." It wasn't mockery. It was mutual respect born from time and humility. Around this time, Ava and I grew closer too. Years of partnership had built trust deeper than friendship. One evening, after an exhausting trade fair, we shared dinner on a hotel rooftop. City lights shimmered below. She looked at me and said, "Do you ever think about how far you've come?" "Every day," I said, "but it still feels like I'm catching up to something." "To what?" "To the version of me that believed I could do this." She smiled. "Maybe that version never left. You just stopped arguing with him." It was the first time I realized I wasn't chasing validation anymore. I was chasing purpose. A few months later, I decided to do something bold. Create an internship program specifically for students who'd been labeled underperformers. We called it Project Second Chance. Each intern was paired with mentors who taught them practical skills, budgeting, logistics, negotiation, things no standardized test ever covered. Watching those kids transform was like witnessing time rewind. One of them, a quiet boy named Leo, reminded me painfully of myself at 18, shy, awkward, brilliant in unconventional ways. He designed a route optimization algorithm that saved us 10% in fuel costs. When I praised him, he said, "I just didn't want to mess up." I told him, "Messing up is how I got here." He smiled nervously. "Then maybe there's hope for me." "There's more than hope," I said. "There's proof." The local news ran a story on the program, calling it a revolution in youth mentorship. Parents started writing letters thanking us for giving their kids confidence again. That meant more than any profit margin. One evening, I received an email from a name I hadn't seen in years, Samantha Cole, my former math teacher who now worked with us. She wrote, "Jake, seeing you help these students makes me realize how wrong I was to measure worth by test scores. Thank you for letting me be part of something that actually changes lives." I read it twice, heart swelling. Life had a poetic rhythm when you listened closely enough. As SwiftPath approached its 10th anniversary, we hosted a celebration at the same warehouse that once served as our first storage space. We invited employees, clients, families, even teachers and old classmates. The atmosphere buzzed with music and laughter. I stood at the podium, looking over the crowd. Malik joking near the buffet, Ava chatting with clients, Cole managing the sound system, and a sea of faces that once doubted, helped, or believed in me. 10 years ago, I was told I wasn't college material. Maybe that was true, but life turned out to be a better teacher anyway. Every mistake was a lesson, every rejection a redirection. This company was built by people who learn differently, and that's our superpower. Applause roared. Someone shouted, "Speech of the year." I just laughed. When the night ended and lights dimmed, I sat alone for a moment, soaking it in. I realized success wasn't measured by how far you rise above others. It was measured by how many you lift with you. After the 10-year celebration, I thought I'd reached a point where life would slow down, maybe even plateau into something predictable. But success has a strange way of demanding reinvention. Just when you think you've arrived, a new chapter knocks on your door. 2 months after the anniversary, SwiftPath received an invitation to bid for a national contract, one that could double our size overnight. It was with Trian Industries, a massive manufacturing conglomerate, the kind of deal that could put us in the big leagues. I gathered the team. Malik spread out blueprints across the table. Ava prepared presentation slides. Call double-check the data. "This could change everything," Ava said, eyes glowing. "If we land Trian, we'll go from regional to national." I nodded, feeling both excitement and fear. "Yeah, but we're going up against companies with armies of analysts and MBAs. We'll need to outthink them, not outspend them." "Story of our lives," Malik muttered, grinning. The next few weeks were chaos. We analyzed Trian's supply chain from every angle. Delays, inefficiencies, weaknesses. I stayed up late reviewing data until my eyes burned. During one of those nights, I caught myself whispering, "Too dumb for college, huh?" Then I laughed, realizing that irony had become fuel. When presentation day came, we stood in a sleek glass conference room surrounded by executives in tailored suits. I wore my usual, a navy blazer and rolled sleeves. Ava led with marketing strategy, Kyle broke down logistics optimization, and I closed with vision. "We may not be the biggest," I told them, "but we're the most adaptive. We don't believe in templates. We build solutions that move as fast as your business does." The room went silent when I finished. One executive, an older man with sharp glasses, leaned forward. "You know, most companies brag about technology. You talk about adaptability. That's refreshing." 2 weeks later, the email arrived. Subject line, "Congratulations, SwiftPath Logistics has been selected." I must have read it a dozen times. I called Malik first. He screamed so loud the phone nearly broke. Ava cried. Even Kyle, usually the calm one, sent a voice note that was just him laughing uncontrollably. That deal changed everything. Suddenly, SwiftPath was a known name. Our fleet doubled, our systems upgraded, our staff expanded to over 100 people. We opened branches across 5 states. For the first time, investors came not to buy us, but to learn from us. But bigger didn't always mean easier. Growth came with tension. Longtime employees struggled to adapt to corporate procedures. I found myself in back-to-back board meetings, far from the hands-on work I loved. Ava called me out one evening. "You're becoming a manager instead of a builder," she said. "I have to," I replied. "It's what the company needs." She shook her head gently. "It's what the company thinks it needs. But what it really needs is the guy who used to fix problems no one else noticed." Her words hit hard. That night, I stayed late, walking through the warehouse floor where I'd once packed boxes myself. I talked to new drivers, warehouse clerks, dispatchers. I asked about problems they faced, software glitches, time delays, lost communication between departments. They spoke honestly, probably thinking I was just pretending to listen. A week later, I implemented a feedback loop system that allowed every employee, from driver to executive, to submit improvement ideas directly to me. Within a month, we saved nearly 5% on operating costs just from internal suggestions. It reminded me that good leadership isn't about hierarchy, it's about listening. One of those suggestions came from Leo, the intern who'd once been too shy to talk above a whisper. His idea to integrate predictive analytics with our delivery tracking became a game changer. When it succeeded, he walked into my office, smiling for the first time without fear. "Guess I'm not too dumb for analytics anymore," he joked. I laughed. Guess none of us ever were. A few months later, I was invited to speak at a national logistics conference. The irony wasn't lost on me. The kid who barely scraped through high school, now sharing a stage with PhDs and CEOs. When it was my turn, I took a deep breath and said, "I'm not here to talk about perfect systems or flawless strategies. I'm here to talk about messy beginnings. Because every great system starts with chaos, and every great mind learns by failing first." The crowd erupted in applause. After the talk, people lined up to shake my hand. One young man, maybe 20, said quietly, "I was about to drop out, but your story made me think maybe that's not the end." I replied, "It's never the end. Sometimes it's just the start of a different education." That night, I realized the story wasn't mine anymore. It belonged to everyone who'd been told you're not enough. Around that time, Ava and I began spending more time together outside of work. What started as friendship slowly turned into something deeper. Dinners turned into late-night walks. Laughter into unspoken connection. One evening, as we left the office under a soft drizzle, I finally said, "You've been beside me since this began. I can't imagine this life without you." She smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Good, because I stopped imagining mine without you years ago." We started dating quietly, keeping it private from the team. It wasn't dramatic, just natural. Two people who'd built something together finally admitting what was always there. For the first time, I felt balance. But life, in its usual unpredictable way, had more tests waiting. A year later, a competitor launched a smear campaign online, accusing SwiftPath of mishandling contracts. It wasn't true, but the damage spread fast. Clients hesitated, partners pulled back. I called an emergency meeting. "We're not fighting rumors with anger," I said. "We'll fight them with transparency." We released every audit, every record, every piece of data proving our credibility. I even went live online explaining our process. It wasn't rehearsed, just raw honesty. The audience responded. Within days, the tide shifted, and our reputation came back stronger. One journalist even wrote, "SwiftPath proves honesty is still the best PR strategy." Through it all, Ava stood by me. "You handle that better than most CEOs ever could," she said one night. I smiled wearily. Maybe being too dumb for college had some perks. I never learned how to fake it. We both laughed. That experience taught me something new. Intelligence isn't just about learning facts. It's about learning humility. By the time SwiftPath turned 12, we weren't just a logistics company anymore. We were a model of how non-traditional thinkers could build empires. We partnered with schools, launched mentorship podcasts, and started a foundation for creative problem solvers. Every success story from our interns felt like a personal victory. One day, while cleaning out old files, I found my original college rejection letters. The emails were yellowed printouts, the words still crisp. While your application shows promise, we regret to inform you. I smiled, shaking my head. I didn't feel bitterness anymore, just gratitude. Those rejections had rerouted me to something far greater than a degree. That evening, I pinned one of those letters on my office wall next to our first $1 million contract. Not as mockery, as proof that failure can be fertilizer. When Ava walked in and saw it, she laughed. Still keeping trophies? I grinned. Just reminders. Of what? She asked. That sometimes the wrong door closing leads you to build your own building. She smiled softly. And you build a whole city. The following year began with a storm. Not the kind that blows through weather reports, but the kind that rearranges everything you thought was solid. It started when one of our biggest clients abruptly filed for bankruptcy, leaving SwiftPath with 6 figures in unpaid invoices. For the first time in years, our cash flow trembled. The board panicked. Kyle looked pale during the meeting. If they default, we lose nearly 12% of projected revenue, he said. Malik slammed his hand on the table. We've come too far to sink over one client. Ava stayed calm, scrolling through her tablet. We'll pivot, she said. We always do. But that night, after everyone left, I stayed alone in the office. The hum of the vending machine echoed like static. For the first time since the garage days, I felt that old anxiety creeping back, that whisper from years ago. You're not built for this. I stared out the window at the city lights and took a long breath. I reminded myself of every night I'd worked through doubt. The next morning, I called the team in. We're not cutting jobs, I said. We'll find a way. We always have. We restructured contracts, reached out to smaller clients, and offered emergency logistics support to local businesses affected by the same collapse. Within 3 months, not only had we recovered, but we'd built relationships that later became even more profitable. Ava called it the most brilliant comeback since the garage. I called it survival through stubbornness. Around this time, Ava and I finally told the team we were together. We half expected raised eyebrows or gossip, but most people just smiled knowingly. Malik joked, about time. You two have been finishing each other's sentences for years. Our lives settled into a strange but comfortable rhythm. Days filled with strategy and staff meetings, nights with takeout dinners and quiet laughter. But deep down, I felt another itch, the kind that comes when comfort starts feeling too safe. One evening, while scrolling through industry news, I noticed how logistics tech was evolving toward automation. Drones, AI, predictive models. I realized that if we didn't adapt soon, we'd risk becoming yesterday's story. I brought it up at the next leadership meeting. We need to invest in automation, I said. Kyle frowned. That's a massive expense. We have to retrain half the team. I know, I replied, but I'd rather evolve than evaporate. It wasn't easy convincing the board, but Ava backed me. He's right, she said. If we want to lead, not follow, we have to take risks. So we began the next transformation, not just a tech upgrade, but a mindset shift. We introduced drones for local deliveries, implemented machine learning algorithms for demand forecasting, and even tested driverless route simulations. It was expensive, terrifying, and thrilling all at once. Within a year, SwiftPath became known as one of the most forward-thinking logistics firms in the region. Industry magazines called us the company that redefined hustle with heart. But amid the headlines and growth, something in me quietly shifted again. The bigger we became, the less personal it all felt. The company was no longer the scrappy dream born in a garage. It was a living machine, efficient, sleek, and slightly impersonal. One night, sitting in the office long after everyone left, I opened an old folder labeled Garage Photos. There we were, me, Malik, a broken whiteboard, Ava holding pizza slices like trophies. The photo made me laugh and ache at the same time. Ava walked in, holding 2 coffees. Nostalgic again? She asked. Just remembering why I started. I said. You started to prove them wrong, she teased. I shook my head. I started because I wanted to prove myself right. She smiled and handed me the coffee. Then don't forget that. The next day, I announced a new internal initiative, Ground Up Fridays. Every Friday, executives would spend 1 hour doing frontline work. Packaging, loading, scheduling, anything hands-on. The idea wasn't symbolic, it was grounding. To remind us all where we came from. At first, people laughed about it. Then, something magical happened. The distance between management and staff started disappearing. Communication improved. Morale soared. Employees said they felt seen again. For me, it felt like oxygen. A few months later, during one of those Fridays, a young driver named Diego approached me shyly. "Sir, can I ask you something?" "Sure," I said, taping a box shut. "Is it true people used to say you were too dumb for college?" I chuckled. "Oh yeah, plenty of people." He looked thoughtful. My guidance counselor said I shouldn't expect much either, that I'm better off staying in delivery jobs. I put the tape down and met his eyes, then proved them wrong. Not out of anger, out of purpose. Use what they said as fuel, not fire. He nodded slowly, a spark in his eyes. "I will." That moment reminded me that the story wasn't done. It never really would be. When Ava and I got married 6 months later, the entire SwiftPath team attended. Malik officiated, badly, and Kyle gave a hilarious toast. The reception was held in the same renovated warehouse where we'd built our first office. The string lights glowed, laughter echoed, and for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to just be happy. During the dance, Ava whispered, "You finally look at peace." "I think I am," I said. Because peace doesn't mean everything's perfect, it just means I stopped fighting the wrong battles. She smiled. "Like what?" "Trying to prove my worth to people who already forgot why they doubted me." Life after marriage didn't slow down, but it felt steadier. We traveled, spoke at events, and expanded SwiftPath as foundation for students. The program grew internationally, helping hundreds of young adults find alternate career paths. Some became coders, others mechanics, artists, entrepreneurs. Every success story felt like a chain reaction, one belief sparking another. Then came a letter that caught me completely off guard. It was from Eastview High, my old school. They were renaming a wing of their new building and wanted to dedicate it to me, the Jake Miller Innovation Center. I laughed when I read it. The same school that once told me I wasn't college material now wants to name a building after me. Ava smiled. "Poetic, isn't it?" The day of the ceremony, I stood on stage again, not as the student who failed to fit in, but as proof that fitting in is overrated. I told the crowd, I used to think intelligence was something measured by scores, but now I know it's measured by perseverance. If I believed what people said, this moment wouldn't exist. So if anyone ever tells you you're not smart enough, smile and say, "We'll see." The auditorium erupted in applause. I saw kids in the audience cheering, kids who looked just like I once did, unsure, restless, underestimated. For them, that speech wasn't about success. It was permission to dream differently. Later that evening, I walked the empty hallways alone. The scent of fresh paint mixed with memories of chalk and rejection letters. On a classroom wall, I saw an old motto still hanging, "Knowledge is power." I smiled and whispered, "Yeah, but curiosity built the engine." That night, as Ava and I drove home, she reached for my hand. "You know," she said, "you've changed more lives than most professors ever will." I glanced at her. Maybe, but all I did was refuse to quit. She squeezed my hand. That's exactly why it worked. The road stretched ahead, dark but calm, headlights carving a path through the unknown, just like it always had. I realized then that the story people told about me had stopped being about failure long ago. It had become about resilience. And somewhere between the laughter, the long nights, and the quiet victories, I understood the truth. Maybe being called too dumb for college was the smartest thing that ever happened to me. The night after the Innovation Center ceremony, I couldn't sleep. Not because of excitement, but because of a deep, humming restlessness. It wasn't dissatisfaction, it was something subtler, a whisper that maybe my purpose was shifting again. When you've built something from the ground up, you eventually face a strange question. What happens when the climb ends? For years, I'd measured progress in milestones, revenue, branches, staff count, media features. But now, none of those metrics seemed enough. The next morning, as sunlight spilled through the blinds, I brewed coffee and sat by the window with my notebook, the same kind I'd used in the early days. At the top of the first page, I wrote a question. What's next? For the first time in a decade, I didn't have an answer. Later that day, Ava found me lost in thought. "You look like a man staring at a map without a compass," she teased. "Maybe I am," I said, smiling faintly. "I don't know where to go from here." She sat across from me, tucking one leg under the other. "You've spent your whole life building things, Jake. Maybe it's time to start teaching how to build." The idea lingered like a song I couldn't unhear. That night, I lay awake, thinking about all the students who wrote letters saying my story changed them, and how many more could benefit if I could share the process, not just the results. A month later, SwiftPath launched the Builders Initiative, an educational branch offering workshops, free resources, and mentorship for self-taught learners and underdogs in business. It wasn't about degrees or grades. It was about teaching the art of learning through failure. The first workshop took place in a converted warehouse in our headquarters. Dozens of young people showed up, some dropouts, some single parents, some just lost. I began the session with a story. When I was told I wasn't college material, I said it felt like a life sentence. But the truth is, being underestimated is just freedom disguised as rejection. When people stop expecting things from you, you're free to define what success means on your own terms. For 2 hours, we talked about practical tools, building a business without funding, learning online, handling rejection, managing fear. When it ended, a girl about 19 came up, holding a worn-out sketchbook. "I design clothes," she said quietly, "but my family says it's a waste of time. They want me to work at a call center." "Show me," I said. She flipped open her sketches, raw, expressive, full of potential. I smiled. "You've got talent. Keep at it. People can only measure what they understand. You're creating something they can't yet see." She left smiling, and I realized something powerful. Inspiring others gave me a joy that success never did. Over the next year, the Builders Initiative spread to schools, community centers, even prisons. We partnered with organizations to help people restart careers. I personally mentored students who'd been expelled, teaching them business basics through real-world projects. One of them, a boy named Tarek, had been kicked out for poor grades. Within 6 months, he was running a small repair business and saving for expansion. He texted me one day, "Mr. Miller, I used to think I was stupid. Now I think I just needed a different kind of classroom." I replied, "Exactly. Keep building yours." Every message like that fueled me more than any award ever could. But not everyone understood the shift. Some investors thought I was losing focus. "Education isn't your core business, Jake," one said. "Stick to logistics. It's safer." I smiled politely. "If I played it safe, we wouldn't exist." He sighed. "You're risking profit for purpose." "Then I'm finally doing business right," I said, ending the call. There's something freeing about choosing impact over approval. It reminded me of those first days in the garage, back when all I had was conviction. At home, Ava supported me fully. She'd taken a step back from daily operations, focusing instead on creative direction for our new educational campaigns. We spent evenings brainstorming over dinner, laughter mixing with ambition. One night, she said, "You know, this new chapter, it feels like you're coming home." "Home?" I asked. "To yourself," she said simply. Her words hit deep. She was right. For years, I'd been running, proving, achieving, fixing. Now I was rooting, building something that outlived ego. Around that time, Malik came to me with news. He wanted to start his own business. I was surprised but proud. "I'll support you," I said immediately. He looked hesitant. "You're not mad?" "Mad?" "Malik, this was always the goal, for you to grow beyond me." He grinned. "You really mean that?" "Absolutely. You helped build SwiftPath. Now it's your turn to build something new." A year later, Malik launched his own regional delivery network, and SwiftPath became his first investor. Watching him succeed felt like watching a younger version of myself break free. During an interview, a reporter asked me, "Doesn't it hurt to see your best people leave?" I smiled. "No, it's proof we're doing something right. Leaders shouldn't build followers. they should build more leaders. That quote spread online, and suddenly I was being invited to panels, podcasts, and leadership summits. But I didn't care about the publicity. I cared about the message reaching someone sitting in a dark room somewhere, thinking they'd already lost. One afternoon, I received a message that stopped me cold. It was from a man named Daniel Ruiz, my old shift supervisor from the grocery store where I'd once stocked shelves. His message read, "Jake, I just saw your interview. Hard to believe the kid I once sent to clean up aisle 5 runs a national company now. You've made us all proud." I sat staring at the screen for a while, smiling. That simple message carried more weight than any trophy. I replied, "You taught me more about work ethic than any professor could. Thank you." Weeks later, Daniel visited our headquarters. He walked in, wide-eyed, shaking his head. "Never thought I need a visitor badge to see one of my old employees." We hugged. He laughed. "Remember when you used to forget to restock the milk section?" "Yeah," I said, laughing. "Now I just restock dreams." He chuckled. "And you're good at it." That visit reminded me that gratitude, not success, is the real reward. That evening, after everyone left, I stood in my office looking out at the skyline again. The city glowed like a heartbeat. I thought about every label I'd carried: dumb, slow, unfit, unqualified, and how, somehow, each one had been repurposed in a drive. I took out my phone and recorded a short message for our internal team group chat. "Hey everyone, I just want to say thank you. 10 years ago, I was the kid nobody believed in. Today, I work with people who remind me daily that belief is contagious. Never forget, your background isn't your boundary. It's your blueprint." Within minutes, replies poured in. Heart emojis, cheers, and messages from employees sharing their own small victories. Reading them, I felt something I hadn't in a long time: quiet contentment. It wasn't the kind that comes from wealth or recognition. It was the peace of knowing I'd turned pain into purpose and purpose into people. And as the city lights flickered beyond the glass, I whispered to myself, they called me too dumb for college, and maybe they were right. Because I was never meant to learn in their classrooms. I was meant to build my own. When Swiftpath turned 15, we threw a modest celebration. No fancy event hall, no gala, just an evening at the warehouse rooftop where it all began. The skyline stretched like an old friend, and the air buzzed with the sound of clinking glasses and laughter. I stood there, looking around at the team that had become family. There was Leo, now head of analytics, Malik, running his own thriving business and partnering with us, Ava, radiant as ever, her laughter floating through the night like music. 15 years. It didn't feel real. It felt like I'd blinked and somehow gone from rejected applications to a legacy. Ava leaned against the railing beside me. "Do you ever think about those people who doubted you?" she asked quietly. I thought for a moment, then shook my head. Not anymore. They played their part. If they hadn't doubted me, maybe I wouldn't have learned to bet on myself. She smiled. "That's the kind of thing you should put in your next speech." I laughed softly. "You mean the one at the Global Entrepreneurship Summit?" "Exactly," she said. "They're expecting something inspirational. Just be you." That summit, a month later, turned out to be the biggest audience I'd ever faced. Thousands of people from around the world, business owners, educators, students, investors, all waiting to hear how a kid once labeled too dumb built a multi-million-dollar company. I walked onto the stage with my notes, trembling slightly in my hand. The lights were blinding, but I'd faced tougher crowds, like the silence of self-doubt that once filled my bedroom. I began. "I don't have a degree. I don't have the right pedigree, or the perfect GPA, or a framed certificate that says I'm qualified. What I do have is proof that failure is not a finish line. It's a foundation." The room was silent, the kind of silence that means people are listening with their hearts, not just their ears. I was told I wasn't college material. I continued. And maybe that was true, because I wasn't built for memorizing answers. I was built for finding them. I wasn't designed to fit into systems. I was meant to question them. So to every person out there who's been told they're not enough, let me tell you, you are not broken. You're just building differently. The crowd erupted in applause. Some people stood, cheering. I felt something loosen inside me, like the last chain of that old label had finally fallen off. Afterward, people swarmed around with congratulations, business cards, photo requests. But what mattered most wasn't the investors or press. It was a young man near the back, clutching a small notebook. He waited until the crowd thinned, then approached me. "Sir," he said nervously, "I'm failing my second year in college. I think about quitting every day. But hearing you, it made me think maybe failure's not the end." I looked at him, seeing the younger me in his eyes. "Failure's never the end," I said softly. "It's just the teacher no one wants, but everyone needs." He smiled weakly. "Thank you. I needed to hear that." When he walked away, I realized that maybe this, not the company, not the contracts, was my real work. Giving back the belief I once borrowed from sheer desperation. In the months after the summit, invitations poured in. Schools, universities, even corporations wanted me to speak. It felt ironic. The same institutions that once rejected me now wanted my words. During a talk at a prestigious university, a professor approached me afterward. "You know, Jake," he said, "your story challenges the very foundation of traditional education. We're rethinking how we define intelligence because of people like you." I smiled. "That's good. The world's too big for one definition." He nodded thoughtfully. "Would you consider helping us design a program for practical innovation?" That's how the Open Classroom Project began, a collaboration between SwiftPath and several schools to create hybrid learning modules focused on real-world problem solving. No exams, no grades, just challenges to be solved. Watching students who'd once been dismissed now thrive under that system was like watching dominoes of possibility fall. But even amid progress, I stayed grounded. Every month, I'd visit the warehouse floor unannounced, help pack boxes, share lunch with drivers, ask about their families. Some new employees didn't even realize who I was. I preferred it that way. Respect shouldn't come from a title. It should come from presence. One afternoon, I sat with Diego, the young driver I'd once told to use doubt as fuel. He was now logistics coordinator. "You still remember what you told me that day?" he asked. I chuckled. "Which part?" He grinned. "The part about using what they said as fuel. I did that. Every time I doubted myself, I remembered your words." "That's how you win," I said. He nodded. "Feels good, doesn't it? Proving them wrong." "It does," I said. "But proving yourself right feels even better." Moments like that kept me human. Years later, when I turned 40, Ava surprised me with a trip back to our old hometown. It had been over a decade since I'd walked those streets. The grocery store where I once worked was gone, replaced by a pharmacy. The high school looked smaller, almost fragile. Time had shrunk the monsters that once terrified me. We parked outside and sat for a moment in silence. "Feels weird," I said. "Full circle," Ava replied. "You ready to see it?" I nodded. We walked the halls together, the echoes of old footsteps almost audible. The classrooms were bright and freshly painted, but I could still feel the ghosts of my younger self in every corner. The boy who doodled in notebooks, who thought he'd never matter, who hid behind humor and silence. A student passed by, carrying a stack of robotics kits. "You here for the alumni tour?" he asked. I smiled. "Something like that." He pointed toward a photo display by the main staircase. "You should check out the Wall of Innovation. It's got all the alumni who started companies." We walked over, and there it was, my photo, small but unmistakable, next to a plaque that read, "Jake Miller, founder of SwiftPath Logistics, innovator, mentor, advocate for alternative education." For a long moment, I just stared at it. Ava slipped her hand into mine. "You okay?" she whispered. "Yeah," I said, voice quiet. "Just remembering." She smiled softly. "He'd be proud of you, you know? That kid who thought he'd never escape this place." I exhaled, eyes stinging. I think he finally did. As we walked out, I noticed a group of students laughing near the lockers. Not mockingly, just the kind of laughter that fills young lives with energy. I smiled. For the first time, the sound didn't sting. It healed. That night, back at the hotel, Ava asked, "If you could go back and change anything, would you?" I thought about it for a while. The failures, the sleepless nights, the humiliation. Then I shook my head. No, because every wrong turn was a step toward the right path. She leaned her head on my shoulder. You really built your own education, didn't you? Yeah, I said. And it came with the best graduation gift, freedom. We sat there quietly, watching city lights flicker outside the window. Somewhere in those reflections, I saw both the boy I used to be and the man I became. Not opposites, but pieces of the same design. After that trip home, something inside me settled. For years, I'd chased growth, success, validation. And finally, I felt like I'd reached a kind of stillness that wasn't silence but peace. Yet peace doesn't mean stagnation. It just means you start asking different questions. One morning, I was sitting in my office watching the city wake up when Ava walked in, holding her tablet. "We got another invitation," she said. "This time from the Ministry of Education. They want you to consult on vocational curriculum reform." I blinked. "You're kidding." "Nope. They said your work with the Builders Initiative inspired a national pilot." I leaned back, letting it sink in. The same system that once told me I wasn't built for learning now wanted my help to redesign it. "You can't make this stuff up," I muttered. 2 weeks later, I found myself in a government meeting room surrounded by suits and officials. They spoke in acronyms and policy terms, but beneath the jargon, I could sense genuine curiosity. The deputy minister, a sharp woman with silver hair, turned to me and said, "Mr. Miller, we've read about your programs. What do you think is the biggest flaw in how we teach our youth?" I thought for a moment before answering. "We treat education like a funnel," I said. "We pour everyone in at the top and expect them to come out the same shape at the bottom. But people don't work that way. Learning isn't uniform. It's personal. We need more pathways, not more pressure." She nodded slowly. "And what would you change first?" "Give teachers permission to fail," I said. "They're afraid to experiment because the system punishes imperfection. But innovation doesn't come from perfection. It comes from iteration." The room fell quiet. Then she smiled. "That's exactly what we needed to hear." Over the next few months, I worked with a team designing pilot programs for skill-based learning. Workshops replaced exams. Projects replaced essays. We trained educators to recognize multiple types of intelligence, not just academic, but creative, spatial, emotional. Watching teachers rediscover joy in teaching was powerful. One of them told me, "For the first time, I feel like I'm helping students learn instead of grading how they fail." That at home. Meanwhile, SwiftPath kept thriving, running mostly without me now. Leo managed analytics, Kyle oversaw corporate partnerships, and Ava handled the creative direction. I spent my time traveling, speaking, mentoring, doing what fed my soul more than my bank account. During one of those trips, I visited a small rural school that had adopted our Builders Initiative model. The classrooms were basic, peeling paint, mismatched desks, but the energy was electric. Students were building robots out of scrap metal, designing apps on secondhand laptops, learning with fire in their eyes. A teacher introduced me to a quiet boy named Hassan who'd once been labeled slow. She whispered, he rebuilt the school's entire solar battery system. I crouched beside him. "How'd you learn that?" He shrugged. "Watched videos. Took stuff apart. Tried until it worked." I smiled. "Sounds like someone I used to know." He looked puzzled. "Who?" "Me," I said. He grinned shyly. "Then maybe I'll start a company one day, too." "You will," I said. "Just promise you'll hire me when you do." Moments like that reminded me why purpose matters more than prestige. Every child like Hassan proved that brilliance doesn't always shine under fluorescent lights. Sometimes it glows quietly in garages, kitchens, and small rooms filled with curiosity. Back home, Ava and I hosted a quiet dinner one Friday night. Malik came with his wife. Leo brought his fiancée. Kyle showed up late carrying dessert. We laughed about the early days, broken vans, missed deadlines, and caffeine overdoses. Somewhere between the laughter, I realized how rare it was to have started something that turned into family. Malik raised a toast. "To the dumbest smart guy we've ever known." Everyone laughed, and I rolled my eyes. "Thanks, I think." He grinned. "You taught us that intelligence isn't about knowing everything. It's about learning anything." That line stuck with me long after the dishes were cleared. A few months later, tragedy struck unexpectedly. Leo, our young analytics lead, was in a serious car accident. He survived but lost mobility in one leg. Visiting him in the hospital, I found him frustrated and silent. I can't even walk properly now, he said bitterly. I pulled up a chair. You remember what I used to say? Failure isn't final. He nodded weakly. Well, I continued. This isn't failure either. It's a detour. You'll find a new way to run. Maybe not with your legs, but with your mind. And that's where your real power lives. He looked at me for a long time before whispering, You really believe that? I've built my entire life on it. Months later, Leo returned to work, in a wheelchair, but sharper than ever. He redesigned our operations dashboard using voice commands, revolutionizing accessibility in our entire system. Watching him present the new interface to the team brought tears to my eyes. Resilience was contagious. That year, I gave one of my most personal talks ever, titled The Gift of Being Underestimated. In it, I said, when someone doubts you, they hand you invisible fuel. You can burn it in anger or use it to forge light. Choose the light. It lasts longer. The video went viral online. Millions watched. Thousands shared their stories in the comments. Messages poured in from people around the world. A carpenter in Kenya, a single mother in Brazil, a dropout in Canada, all saying they felt seen for the first time. Ava and I read those messages together, tears streaming down her face. Do you realize, she said softly, how many lives you've touched? I shook my head. No, I just told the truth I wish someone had told me. Later that night, we sat on a balcony watching city lights shimmer below. You ever miss the early days? She asked. All the time, I said. Back then, it was just survival. Simple, raw. Every win felt like a miracle. She smiled. You think you'd ever go back? Not back, I said, but maybe sideways, into something new. Like what? I don't know yet. But I know this. The best chapters usually start when you stop trying to impress anyone. She nodded, resting her head on my shoulder. Then we're in for a beautiful next chapter. That night, I wrote in my notebook again, just like I had 15 years earlier. On a blank page, I wrote one sentence. The journey doesn't end when you arrive. It ends when you stop exploring. And as I closed the notebook, I realized something quietly profound. I hadn't just built a company. I'd built a classroom without walls. One where every failure, every insult, every setback had become part of the curriculum. A year later, SwiftPath reached a point I'd never imagined possible: international expansion. We opened our first overseas branch in London, followed by offices in Toronto and Dubai. Every headline, every interview, every plaque that called me a visionary still made me laugh sometimes. I was just the same kid who once failed algebra twice. Only now, I'd learned how to turn failure into design. The London office opening was surreal. Standing there, surrounded by glass walls and British accents, I thought back to those long nights in the garage, scribbling routes with markers, half asleep from exhaustion. I gave a short speech that day, but I meant every word. I didn't build SwiftPath to prove people wrong. I built it to prove that anyone can find a path if they stop waiting for permission. The applause was thunderous, but what moved me most was afterward when a young employee approached me quietly. Sir, he said, his accent thick, I read your story online before applying here. I almost didn't because I don't have a degree, but your story gave me courage. So thank you. I smiled and shook his hand. Then it worked, I said. That's exactly why we exist. When I returned home, I found Ava waiting with a surprise, an ultrasound photo. For a long second, I couldn't process it. We're having a baby? I whispered. She nodded, eyes shimmering. Yeah, you're going to be a dad. I laughed and cried at the same time, pulling her into a hug. It felt like life had just given me another reason to build better. I spent the next few months learning a different kind of logistics, diapers, bottles, and sleepless nights. But when our daughter, Lily, was born, everything changed again. The first time I held her, I whispered, You can be anything. Don't ever let anyone tell you what you're not. Watching her grow became a mirror to everything I'd learned. She crawled, fell, got up, tried again, and I realized that's all any of us ever do, just with fancier excuses. But balancing fatherhood and work was hard. I'd wake up for 3 a.m. feedings and still show up for 8 a.m. meetings. One morning, Ava found me asleep at my desk, cradling Lily in my lap and surrounded by papers. You can't run on willpower forever, she said gently. I know, I said, rubbing my eyes. I just don't want to miss a single moment, with her or the company. She smiled softly. You don't have to do everything. You just have to be there. For her, for me, for you. Her words sank in deeper than she realized. I started scaling back. Fewer meetings, more time home. I realized that presence isn't measured in hours, but attention. I didn't need to do more. I just needed to be where I was. As Lily grew, she became curious about everything. She'd ask questions that made me laugh. Daddy, who made the first truck? Or, why do birds fly but we can't? Every question was a small reminder of why curiosity matters more than credentials. When she turned 4, her preschool teacher called me in. Mr. Miller, she began carefully. Lily's very inquisitive, but she doesn't always follow structure. I smiled. Good, I said. Keep it that way. The teacher blinked. Excuse me? She's not here to fit a pattern. She's here to make one. It probably sounded arrogant, but I meant it. I wasn't going to let another system crush her, wonder the way mine tried to crush mine. As the years passed, Swift Path ran smoothly without me needing to micromanage. I focused on mentoring, writing, and spending time with family. Ava suggested I write a book, not about success, but about the messy middle. People see where you are, she said, but they need to understand what it took. So I began writing Too Dumb to Quit, the real education of Jake Miller. It wasn't a business manual. It was part memoir, part manifesto, filled with stories of failure, fear, and the small wins in between. I poured myself into every page, honest and unfiltered. When it was published, it hit bestseller lists within weeks. The strangest moment came when universities, yes, the same ones that had rejected me, started using it in their entrepreneurship courses. I got an email from one professor who wrote, "We teach your book to remind students that success isn't always linear or academic." I printed that email and pinned it beside my old rejection letters. The irony wasn't bitter. It was poetic. With the book's success came a new wave of opportunities. TV, interviews, talk shows, even an honorary doctorate from one of those universities. Standing on that stage in a black gown, holding that diploma, I smiled to myself. Not because I needed validation, but because life had a wicked sense of humor. In my speech, I said, I'm honored to receive this degree, but I'd trade it in a second for the failures that taught me everything it represents. The crowd laughed, but the truth was no joke. Failure was the best education I'd ever received. Afterward, an older professor approached me and said, "You remind me of why I started teaching in the first place." Somewhere along the line, I forgot that learning is supposed to be messy. I nodded. Messy made me who I am. As Lily grew older, she became my constant reminder to stay grounded. Once when I was working late, she toddled into my office, clutching a drawing of our family, stick figures standing under a big sun. "You forgot dinner," she said matter-of-factly. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. I got busy." She tilted her head. "You always say that." That cut deeper than any insult I'd ever received. That night, I shut my laptop early and promised myself, no success would be worth missing these small, fleeting moments. Ava and I began traveling less, working from home more. We set up a small art corner for Lily in the office. Sometimes she'd scribble beside me while I answered emails. Once she looked up and said, "Daddy, what's a CEO?" I smiled. "Someone who's in charge of helping other people do their best work." "Then I'm the CEO of my drawings," she said proudly. "Exactly," I laughed. "And you're doing a perfect job." By the time she turned 6, SwiftPath had become more than a company. It was a movement, inspiring others to see intelligence in every form. People from all over the world sent messages, thanking us for proving that potential doesn't expire just because a system can't measure it. But one letter stood out. It was from my old math teacher, Samantha Cole, now retired. She wrote, "Jake, I've followed your journey all these years. You taught me more about education than any textbook ever could. Thank you for forgiving my short-sightedness and showing the world what true intelligence looks like." I read it twice, my throat tight. I sent her a reply. "You didn't fail me. You were part of what shaped me. Thank you for being in the story, Every character matters. That night, I looked around my home. Ava reading, Lily asleep, my old notebooks stacked neatly on the shelf, and realized the most extraordinary part of life isn't what we build, but who we become while building it. I closed my eyes and whispered, they called me too dumb for college, but maybe I was just learning something bigger. As the years passed, my life took on a kind of calm rhythm I'd never known before. The chaos that once fueled me had softened into something gentler. Not complacency, but clarity. Swift Path no longer needed me to run every decision. It had become a living organism, sustained by the people who believed in it as much as I did. One crisp autumn morning, I arrived at headquarters to find the lobby filled with students on a field trip. They were part of our outreach program, and one of our staff members was giving them a tour. When the group spotted me, a teacher whispered my name, and suddenly I was surrounded by curious faces. "Is it true you didn't go to college?" one boy asked. I smiled. "Yep, not a single day." Another raised her hand shyly. "Then how did you know what to do?" "I didn't," I said honestly. "I just started. Then I failed. A lot. But every failure taught me something new, and eventually the lessons added up." They looked at me like I'd just told them the secret code to life. Maybe in a way I had. After they left, I stood by the glass doors watching their bus pull away. I thought about how much the world had changed and how much it hadn't. There were still kids being told they weren't enough. There were still systems that measured potential by the wrong metrics. And that's when I knew what I needed to do next. That night, I told Ava over dinner. "I want to start an institute," I said. "A real one. Not a business school, a life school. For kids who don't fit anywhere else." She looked intrigued. "Like a mentorship academy?" "Exactly," I said. "A place where curiosity is the curriculum. Where failure isn't punished, but studied. A space for people like me. The ones who learn differently." She nodded slowly, a smile spreading across her face. "Then let's build it." And just like that, a new dream began. We called it the Path Institute, a tribute to Swift Path, but more personal. It took 2 years of planning, funding, and sleepless nights, but when the doors finally opened, I felt the same thrill I'd felt the first day I launched my company. Only this time, it wasn't about profit. It was about planting seeds. The first batch of students arrived, a mix of dropouts, artists, tinkerers, and dreamers. They were nervous, unsure if they belonged. I smiled at them during orientation and said, "You don't have to fit in here. You just have to show up." Our curriculum was simple but revolutionary. No grades, no exams. Students worked on real-world problems, designing sustainable delivery systems, community projects, and startups. Failure was celebrated as progress. Every week ended with what we called Failure Friday, where everyone shared what hadn't worked and what they'd learned. The laughter in those sessions was healing. Watching those young people thrive in an environment free from judgment filled me with pride I couldn't put into words. One student, Maria, stood out. She'd been expelled from 3 schools and came in convinced she was a lost cause. But within months, she designed a prototype for an affordable solar-powered food cart that could serve remote areas. Her project won national attention, and investors lined up to support her idea. When she hugged me on graduation day, she whispered, "Thank you for making me feel smart for the first time." I'll never forget that moment. It was as if the entire journey, every rejection, every insult, had led to that single sentence. Swift Path and the Path Institute began working side by side, one delivering goods, the other delivering belief. We opened branches in developing regions, creating opportunities for people who had been written off. I visited those places often, meeting mechanics, farmers, and inventors who built brilliance out of scarcity. During one of those visits, I met an old man in a small village who said something that stayed with me forever. He told me, "Education is not about filling a pot. It's about lighting a fire. But the fire has to come from inside." He was right. That was the essence of everything I'd learned and everything I wanted to teach. Back home, life was good. Lily had turned 12 and was already showing signs of her mother's creativity and my stubbornness. One evening, she sat beside me on the couch, scrolling through old photos of my early days. "Daddy," she said, Why do people say you were dumb? I chuckled. Because I didn't learn the way they expected me to. She frowned. But you build all this. Yeah, I said, smiling. Sometimes the world just takes a little longer to understand you. She thought for a moment. I think they were wrong. So do I said softly. Moments like that reminded me how cycles can change, how the wounds of one generation can become the wisdom of the next. As the Path Institute grew, I started writing again, short essays, reflections on learning, creativity, and human potential. They went viral. People shared them under hashtags like hashtag build your own path and hashtag failure is fuel. One post, in particular, caught fire. Don't chase credentials. Chase curiosity. Degrees expire. Curiosity doesn't. It was shared over 10 million times. Celebrities quoted it. Schools printed on walls. I was invited to speak at international education conferences where words like dropout and failure were being replaced with alternative learner and resilient thinker. I couldn't help but smile at the irony. The world was finally catching up to what I'd learned in that garage 15 years ago. But amidst the recognition, I stayed humble. Every time someone called me inspirational, I reminded myself I wasn't a hero. I was just someone who refused to quit when quitting would have been easier. One day, after a talk in New York, a journalist asked, Jake, what do you think is your greatest achievement? I thought about Swift Path, the Path Institute, the awards, the book, the money, but none of it felt right. So I said, my greatest achievement is that I no longer measure success by anyone else's ruler. She smiled. That's a quote, if I've ever heard one. Later that evening, as Ava and I walked through Central Park, she took my hand. Do you ever miss the chase? She asked. Sometimes, I admitted, but peace feels better. She smiled. Then you finally graduated. I laughed. From what? From proving yourself. That line stuck with me all the way home. Maybe she was right. Maybe this was graduation, not from university, but from doubt. A few weeks later, I stood in the Path Institute's courtyard, watching a new batch of students arrive. They looked nervous, hopeful, curious, the same look I must have had the day I decided to bet on myself. I turned to Ava and said quietly, you know, if I had gone to college, none of this would have happened. She smiled. Then, thank God you didn't. 2 years after the Path Institute opened, something unexpected happened. It became bigger than me. What started as one small campus turned into a global movement. We had centers across continents, Africa, South America, Southeast Asia, each one teaching creativity, resilience, and real-world problem-solving. I'd wake up to messages from students around the world, photos of inventions made from scrap metal, videos of small startups launched by kids who once doubted themselves, letters from parents who said, thank you for giving my child back their confidence. It was overwhelming in the best way. At our annual summit, I stood on stage in front of hundreds of mentors and students from 20 countries. The room buzzed with languages and laughter, proof that curiosity spoke universally. I began my speech with a story I hadn't told in years, about the night I'd opened my first rejection letter. I thought that letter ended my story, I said, but it didn't. It just changed the chapter title. I told them how every no became a lesson, how every closed door forced me to build my own, and how sometimes the world's greatest gift is disbelief, because it forces you to find belief from within. By the end of the talk, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. A standing ovation thundered through the hall, but what mattered most was what happened afterward. Students lined up to tell me how failure had shaped them too. One girl from Kenya said, I failed my exams twice, but your videos made me try again. Now I run a repair shop and employ 5 people. A boy from Brazil added, my teachers said I was lazy. I just needed a different way to learn. The Path Institute gave me that. Hearing them, I realized I was witnessing something miraculous, the ripple effect of resilience. After the summit, Ava found me backstage wiping my eyes. You okay? She asked, smiling knowingly. Yeah, I said quietly. I just realized I'm not the story anymore. They are. She hugged me. That's how you know you've done it right. Back home, life felt slower in the best way. Lily was growing fast, too fast if you asked me. One day, She came home from school frustrated. "Daddy," she said, "my teacher says I talk too much and don't pay attention. She says I need to be more like the other kids." I knelt down, so we were eye level. "Lily," I said softly, "you don't need to be like anyone else. You just need to keep asking questions." She frowned. "But she says I'll get in trouble." "Then get in good trouble," I said with a wink. "The kind that comes from curiosity." Her laughter filled the room, and I realized something. The cycle had broken. I'd spent half my life unlearning shame, but she'd never have to learn it in the first place. A few months later, Ava and I visited the Path Institute's newest campus in Manila. During a Q&A session, a student asked, "Sir, do you ever wish those people who doubted you could see you now?" I thought about it for a moment and smiled. "They already do," I said. "They work for me, or they've learned from me, or they've been helped by what we've built together. That's enough." The crowd laughed and applauded, but the truth behind the words was deeper. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It never really had been. It was about transformation, about turning hurt into help, doubt into direction. Later that evening, Ava and I walked along the harbor, city lights dancing on the water. "You ever think about retirement?" she asked suddenly. I chuckled. "Retire from what?" "Curiosity." She nudged me playfully. "From working this much." I looked out at the horizon. Work doesn't tire me anymore. Only meaning keeps me going. As long as there's someone out there who still believes they're not enough, I'm not done yet. She smiled. "Then I guess you'll be busy for a long time." We both laughed, but we knew it was true. Back in the US, I started mentoring young founders personally, not for profit, but because I saw pieces of myself in them. One of them, a 20-year-old coder named Arjun, reminded me of the sleepless, stubborn version of myself. He dropped out of college to build an app, but was struggling with funding and doubt. "Everyone says I'm reckless," he told me one night over coffee. "They said the same about me." I said, "Maybe they're right. But sometimes the world needs reckless people, the ones willing to bet on something before there's proof." He stared at me. "You really think I can make it?" I smiled. "I don't think I know, because you're already doing the hardest part, not giving up." A year later, Arjun's startup went viral, and he called me just to say, "You were right." Moments like that reminded me how mentorship is the purest form of leadership. You're planting trees whose shade you may never sit under. That same year, SwiftPath celebrated its 20th anniversary. The event was huge. Employees from all over the world, press, partners, families. I stood on that stage again, looking out at hundreds of faces, some new, some from the very beginning. Malik, now a CEO himself, stood in the front row, grinning proudly. Ava held Lily's hand in the audience, both of them smiling like sunlight. When the applause quieted, I began. 20 years ago, I was just a kid restocking shelves, believing everyone else's story about me. They said I wasn't smart enough. They said I wasn't built for college, or for leadership, or for success. They were half right. I wasn't built for their version of it. But I was built for this. I gestured around the room. For curiosity, for resilience, for people who see obstacles as detours, not dead ends. This company isn't mine anymore. It's ours. And it stands as proof that intelligence has no template, no test, and no expiration date. The crowd erupted in applause. Ava wiped her eyes. Lily clapped wildly. After the speech, an older man approached me quietly. It took me a moment to recognize him. Mr. Lewis, my old guidance counselor. His hair was completely gray now, his face softer with age. "Jake," he said, smiling warmly. "I couldn't miss this. I just wanted to say, I'm proud of you. You've done something rare. You've changed the story for generations of students." I smiled, genuinely moved. "Thank you, sir. You played your part, too." He looked confused. "I did. Yeah," I said. "You told me I wasn't college material. You weren't wrong, just early." He laughed, shaking his head. "You always had a way with words." We took a photo together, the man who wants to find my limits and the man who outgrew them. It felt poetic, not bitter, like closure wrapped in kindness. That night, as the lights dimmed and people began to leave, I lingered in the empty hall. The echoes of laughter faded, replaced by the hum of quiet satisfaction. I thought about every version of myself that had existed, The boy who believed he couldn't, the man who proved he could, and the teacher who realized he didn't have to anymore. Ava walked up, slipping her hand into mine. You ready to go? Yeah, I said, glancing around one last time. I think we've finally arrived. She smiled. Arrived where? At peace, I said simply. A few years later, I found myself standing in front of classroom again, not as a guest, not as a speaker, but as a quiet observer. It was a new semester of the Path Institute. Students were laughing, debating, sketching on whiteboards. There was energy in the air, that raw, electric curiosity that once lived inside me and had refused to die, no matter how many people tried to bury it. A young instructor noticed me by the door. Sir, would you like to say a few words? She asked. I shook my head. No need. You're already doing it better than I ever could. She smiled and went back to the lesson, and I just watched for a while. The hum of discussion, the light bouncing off notebooks, the sparkle in eyes that believed in themselves. It was everything I'd wished for years ago and finally got to witness in others. After class, I walked through the courtyard. The afternoon sun was warm, the air filled with laughter and the faint smell of fresh paint. A student sitting under a tree waved. Mr. Miller, can I ask something? Of course, I said, walking over. He closed his laptop and looked up at me. How did you know it was going to work out? Back when everyone doubted you. I smiled, thinking about it. I didn't, I said. I just kept moving. You don't need to see the whole road to start walking. You just need to trust the first few steps. He nodded slowly, as if tucking the words away for later. That night, I sat in my home office, the one lined with old notebooks and framed photos. On the wall were three things: a copy of my first rejection letter, a picture of SwiftPath's garage team, and Lily's crayon drawing of our family under a giant sun. Those three symbols, rejection, resilience, and love, told the whole story better than any book ever could. Outside, the city hummed softly, and I thought about how every person I'd met had played a role. The ones who doubted me, the ones who believed, the ones who left, and the ones who stayed. They were all chapters in the same imperfect, beautiful education. Ava came in quietly, carrying 2 cups of tea. She set one beside me and kissed the top of my head. Still working? Just thinking, I said, about how strange it is. The world used to see me as a failure. Now they call me a teacher. She smiled. That's because you never stopped learning. I took her hand and looked out the window. The skyline glittered in the distance, alive and endless. For a long moment, I just breathed, grateful, calm, and utterly present. Finally, I said, almost to myself, you know what's funny? They were right about one thing. She raised an eyebrow. What's that? I really wasn't built for college. I smiled. I was built for life. Ava laughed softly, squeezing my hand. And you passed with honors. We both smiled, letting the quiet fill the room. In the distance, the faint hum of delivery vans echoed through the night. SwiftPath trucks still running, carrying goods across cities, carrying dreams. Somewhere in a small home or a cluttered garage, maybe another kid was staying up late, building something no one believed in yet. And maybe one day, they'd whisper to themselves the same words that had carried me through every storm. They call me too dumb for college, but maybe I was just smart enough to learn my own way.